It faded out this time. I got it working. Hi, everybody. This is Debbie Levitt from Delta CX, a full-service CX and UX agency. Welcome to episode 98 of our live-streamed podcast. And this one is UX and Autism. And remember that we are live on YouTube, Twitch, and LinkedIn. So wherever you are, you can ask your questions and I will capture them and put them up onto the known world and take your questions as we go. And what else can I tell you? If you're on YouTube, empathize with the like button. And other than that, yep, our guest is loving that, and I can see him. And don't forget to follow us on Twitch. Twitch has a really short delay, which means I'm going to see your questions and comments faster. And we're running a signed book giveaway there. So over on Twitch, put in !giveaway and learn how you can enter for free. So let's bring in our guest. This is Sean. Sean, please spell your name for everybody and tell us who the heck you are.
Sean McSharry, S-E-A-N. Do you want the surname as well?
Yeah, just so if people who are listening can...
Yeah, M-C-S-H-A-R-R-Y. I am currently the head of user experience at a company called DXC. They're a very large international consultancy. But I've contracted for 20 years, no more. Let's not give away my age. Just a long time now. I've covered pretty much every aspect of technology, but all of it leading into user experience. And I've carried out user experience now for, I had to look at this the other day, 17 years. Wow.
So you might know a few things.
A couple of bits. I'm hoping. I'm fake it till you make it. That's what I say.
Oh my God. Sean, I hope you'll make it someday because
me too.
This faking must stop. So people are joining in, especially on Twitch. Hello to Kayleen and Charlene and everybody whose names rhyme is in Twitch today. So Sean, thank you so much for being a part of this show and especially for coming on and talking about your own personal experiences. And I'm going to be throwing some questions at you, but we welcome questions from the live audience as well. So I'm going to start with, hey, not everybody knows what autism is. Can you kind of explain autism to us, please?
Yeah, I'm on the spectrum. I'm autistic. Look, this is what it looks like. Exactly Beautiful. The same as everybody else. Right, exactly. For those who don't know, autism in its most basic sense really is just that people are born wired differently. I'm going to mention something about the disability aspect, which it's really not. But essentially, when people don't die there, this needs to last longer.
I'm going to be okay, really. Thank you.
Thank God.
Empathy.
They're born. We'll get onto that. They're born wired differently. So, when we're being wired up as children neurologically, as our brains are growing, they make standard connections from various parts of the brain to carry out standard evolutionary responses. Eat, sleep, interact with other humans socially. Autistic people aren't wired up the same way. They have slightly different instructions, and it varies a lot from autistic person to autistic person. As they say, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. That's not to say that it's not a clinical diagnosis, though, because it is. There's a lot of similarities that allow it to be an actual diagnosis. But there are, as there are with neurotypicals, there's a broad range of differences and a broad range of similarities. Autistic people see the world in a different light, as it were. They see things different ways, which is one of their strengths. But they end up calling autism a disorder, which I find a bit off. It's a bit like saying height's a disorder. On the far ends of the spectrum, yes, if you're exceptionally short or exceptionally tall, but it's not a disability. Might be if you're in a wheelchair. It's binary. You are absolutely disabled. The autistic spectrum is just that, like height. At the far ends of the scale, you definitely have problems, but you're not disabled. The world is simply built in a way that does not enable you. So the world disables your ability to interact with it. You're not the majority. You're not the common middle ground. But there's a big chunk of the autism spectrum where high-functioning autistics actually interact with the world quite well. just differently, and that's the problem. And we need to be realistic. The reality is that the world's never going to be built exactly right for absolutely everyone. Um, so yeah, in a nutshell, brief nutshell, that's autism.
Okay, thank you for the nutshell. And can I ask when you were first diagnosed?
Ooh,
Because many
I
people,
ran
because it
into
goes
a
undiagnosed in people. A lot of people find out in their 40s or older.
I was in one of those two groups. Um, I didn't find out too much later. 12 years ago, a family member who I hadn't met before, who is heavily autistic, high functioning autistic, on the Asperger's part of the syndrome, or what they used to call Asperger's. I met him, and within a couple of minutes, he said, "You're autistic," which I immediately dismissed, that he was
Right.
clearly deranged. I'd always been different. I'd always been a bit of a geek, socially awkward.
Smartest guy in the room.
And yeah, it's always a bit hairy to say that, because it can come across as a bit pretentious, a bit poncy, a bit snobby. But often
But
you do
yes.
feel that way. Yeah, absolutely, you do feel that way. Yeah, it's still a hindrance today. You sit there going, "Why are these people just so stupid? Why can't they see this is obvious?" But I've learned not to say that out loud. I've learned it's a bad thing if you do
Right.
that. Bad things
Use
happen.
your inside voice.
But yeah, which is limited. I'll be honest. So yes, so he said I was autistic. I spent 2 years in denial. But I remember that there were many episodes during those 2 years where I'd go, "Ooh, that thing I just did, that really was quite autistic by standards." So I started reading up on it, and getting to understand more about what the spectrum was like, how it affected people, what it, and the more I did it, the more of the symptoms, if you will, that I had, and quite heavily too. Towards the end of those 2 years, I found some online tests, that are they are the tests they carry out. So you can take them yourselves, and then you can go and get formally diagnosed. So it's a pretty good idea, actually, because you get to take the tests as neutrally as you can, and see if you're anywhere near the spectrum. Honestly, I didn't expect to be that near the spectrum. I was way over the border. I mean, way onto the spectrum. So in some respects, it was quite a relief. But I waited another 8 years before getting a formal diagnosis. There was no upside to it. You've got to figure people will think you're disabled. It won't help your job opportunities. It won't help your personal relationships. There was nothing potentially good about it at all. There was a tremendous sense of relief in some respects, though. There were things that had bothered me all my life, especially social interaction, for example, that I could not understand or explain, and I wished that I had some point of reference that I could build on. And finding out that I was on the spectrum really, really, really helped, and explained a lot of good and bad things. So yeah, it then took me a couple of years before I went and actually got diagnosed, which is not a straightforward process, by the way. They're very reluctant to actually test you. You have to go through a lot and redo a lot of tests, and then more tests, and including an EQ test, an empathy test, which, as you can imagine, did not come out well. But I'll come back to that.
We'll get to that. Stephanie
Yes.
in YouTube is saying, haha, this feels like some days in meetings of mine, like, why can't they see this will never work? And let's be clear, if you feel like you're the smartest person in the room, and if you feel like you're the only person who can see some of the possible outcomes, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are autistic. It might just be you're the smartest person in the room and you're the only one who can see possible outcomes. So do not take that as an auto-diagnosis. Yes, exactly. Yes. You're in the right career.
Yeah.
So when you found out you had autism, you were already in UX. Did it help push you further into UX?
No, actually, because I found out late, I developed an awful lot of coping mechanisms on my own, and I'd never had the luxury of using autism as a crutch. I suspect if I'd known early, I might have backed off from a lot of things, oh, I'm autistic, or it's not for me. But because I didn't know any of that, it was just a really painful struggle a lot of the times. I'll be honest, you're intellectually well equipped, but being intellectually equipped doesn't equip you for irrational, emotive responses from humans. And it actually is almost a disability. So you're trying to apply rational logic to their behaviour. So in that respect, I'd gone through the grinder and had to come out the other end with my own coping mechanisms and worked my way into UX, because UX is a very natural environment for the type of thought processes that autistic people are imbued with.
Deductive
So by
reasoning,
then,
logic,
yeah,
finding
absolutely,
patterns.
yeah, very much, yeah. And so it made no difference. It was validation more than anything else.
Cool, cool. Stephanie also says, in some countries, an official diagnosis means you pay extra for insurance. Lucky you. Did you have to pay more in insurance? You're in the UK.
Well, yeah, so we don't have to pay health insurance per se, and they're becoming a bit more aware of it now in places like the UK. So they're treating it like a special ability or something you can't discriminate against. So
Okay, a
I think they'd be in hot water
protected.
if they tried that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Okay,
protected group, which I'm half on the fence about, but yeah.
sure. Friend of the show, Oz, if you like Microsoft Excel, follow Oz. He says, I like that he's getting into the details of real diagnosis. Online tests can make things like autism and ADHD seem cute and fashionable.
Yeah, yeah, they are. You know, there's another commonality. You just mentioned it between autism and UX. They both become quite fashionable, and yet we see the consequence of that with UX. Yeah, I think they are potentially a little bit fashionable. I know people who, when I it sounds a bit weird saying this, when I came out, um, they went, oh yeah, yeah, I'm autistic too, or oh yeah, yeah, we're all on the spectrum. Are you on the spectrum? My ass. You don't know anything about the spectrum if you just think, oh yeah, we're all on it. It's the reason it's. I saw a fellow autistic person lash out rather hard about this. There's a reason it's diagnosable.
Right.
It is a condition, a neurological condition. We're not all on the spectrum. We're all on some spectrum, but not the autistic one. Yeah, it can undermine and undervalue uh, what we need as autistic people to be at our best. But it's not too bad in the UK.
Okay, cool. That's good. Did anything about the nature of your jobs change after you were diagnosed or accepted it? Like, did you say, like, oh, I want to do more managing or I want to do more research? Like, did you adjust your jobs at all?
No, I'll tell you the beauty
Could you
about
have?
autism is no, no, no. The beauty about being autistic is that I'm very data driven, very focused on the facts. I really don't care that much about the emotions behind things. They either support the truth or they don't. Um, Really, being diagnosed just validated that I was doing the right thing, and I'd always stuck to that because it's the only reference point I have: data, facts, the truth, patterns. And you only need to look at subjects like physics, patterns, maths. They are the natural language of existence. I'm certain that if I get to the bottom of a pattern, I'm right. There's no, was it my opinion, or am I right, or are you right? No, nobody's right. This is the data. It is right. So it's actually quite satisfying.
I wanted to ask, and I hope you don't find this one too wacky, but I've heard people say autism is a disability, and I've heard them say it's a superpower. Do you see your experience as a disability, a superpower, or both? Or something else?
It is a bit of both. Yeah, it is. It is definitely a bit of both. I think, as I mentioned earlier on, neurotypicals have strengths and weaknesses too. They have superpowers and kryptonite. Autistic people just have different ones. And again, this is where the idea of them being that separate is a bit of a farce. Certainly, we, generally speaking, autistic people are super focused. If they're focused on a task, they are relentless, robotic. I'll stay up late into the night after night, if I can't solve a problem, and I will not take my eyes off that ball. It has to be solved. There is an answer, and I'll beat my pattern to fix it or to understand it. And I know many other autistics that are super focused like that. So that's a power. If you get people in to do jobs that require super focus, there's focus burnout. I forget what it's called. They did some testing with people looking at luggage at the airport when it comes through, who scan the X-rays. And part of the test is they put a toy gun in every so often,
Right.
and you've got to stay focused. And they found that after, I think it was after 5 minutes or something, that they'd lose that focus. They couldn't stay focused, and guns would get through. So they've realised that this is a problem. But autistic people don't suffer that, and maybe that's another job for autistic people. Autistic people have less problem with that. We can remain a lot more focused. Seeing in patterns is probably the main. If there is a superpower, that's it. The ability to abstract that into logical solutions is just a knock-on effect. The fact that I can see things in patterns like that really helps me. And it's actually it's an argument for. There's a lot of people talk about keeping research and design separate. From an autistic perspective, that makes no sense at all. Actually, I'd argue from more than an autistic perspective, from a UX perspective generally. When we see a problem or a challenge, there's a pattern to that. And there are elements of that pattern that are clearly broken because they don't fit the pattern. And you can see those quite quickly. Your job in taking that research, seeing that pattern into a solution, is simply to fix those bits. It's the same pattern, or it's a streamlined version. The idea of artificially separating those two is farcical. You end up doing more work and having to impart that pattern, that insight, to other people who then have to try and interpret it. So the pattern strength is huge for us. Rapid learning, always learning. I think that's probably part nature, part nurture. I'm always learning new stuff, but I've always had to learn new stuff. I've always had a fascination with new information, but equally, there's been so much for me to try to understand about human behaviour, human society, etc., that I've had to as well. So that rapid learning curve is really important. And again, back to UX, when you start a new project, there's a rapid learning curve about the entire environment. People, processes, machines, security, governance, goals, you name it. So that's a strength. It's hard to say if it's a strength or a weakness or both. We're very direct, very honest. I've been complimented on my directness. It's been remarked upon. Yes, I know you're going to tell me the truth. It's not always nice or palatable. We don't tiptoe through the minefield of human emotions very well. But you can be damn sure when we tell you something, it's the truth. We're not trying to hide it behind anything. Very loyal. This has come up quite a lot, actually. Not like Labrador loyal, but, if we're on a project with people, we're very loyal to them, to the purpose of that project, focused on the outcomes. There's an element of creativity in UX as well, in autism as well. We see it with some quite famous people who've gone on to become brilliant creatives. It still doesn't take away that cold, hard, logical, fact-based background. But some people, that wiring wires them up to be often, there's a correlation between autism and synesthesia as well, higher than the standard population. And that can lead to great creativity too. So there's a bit of that too. I think there's an element to be said about equality too. Autistic people, generally speaking, don't have this emotional position on a lot of things. They see data, cold, hard data. And as a result, I find personally listening to debates about equality, whether that be race, gender, politics, very confusing, very surprising. If you ask an autistic person if people are equal, they will tell you no. No two people are equal based on the data at a granular level. Absolutely not. You will not get them to talk to you about how equality is a really important thing, because they'll tell you that, as far as I can see, not a single person has ever been equal, and it's in fact the driving factor behind evolution. But if you ask them about those superficial judgments on equality, race, colour, religion, gender, they have no interest in that at all. I can never understand how people can judge each other on such a superficial factor. The trade-off here is that when we feed data back, it doesn't tiptoe around that either. If we find a difference based on any number of factors, we'll often present that sort of thing back, quite cold, hard, and logical. And people can misinterpret that. People can take that and go, well, that's because they're a particular race or gender or religion, and feed those emotive, empathetic positions back on top of that and lose the value of the data. So that particular part is kind of a power and a weakness. I think in terms of disabilities, weaknesses, we're terrible at abstract learning. It's a real challenge. And this happens all the way through school, and that's actually one of the big issues for all autistics at school. But we need to get a foothold on discovery, because you give us abstract pieces of information, we cannot connect the dots. It's very hard. So there's a very solid process that I have all my team cover and work with, helps them get through the process from one end to the other, whether they're autistic or not, and it works really well. As I say, the direct honesty, it's potentially on both sides. We're not UX, whether we like it or not. People talk to me about operationalizing UX and growing it and industrializing it, and the reality is that UX doesn't need to be industrialized particularly. Even on the biggest projects, I have a maximum of 2 UXers, senior UXers on any project. And we've taken apart the biggest problems. So not being a natural team player is okay in UX, because we come back together and we talk to each other about our learnings, but they're not. Autistic people are not naturally team players. And it takes time. I think this is one of the things that I learned through personal learning and having to adapt and experimenting, and coping mechanisms. Big picture thinking can be a challenge. We're so ingrained in looking at the detail. I do big picture thinking. Now, that might just be that I'm slightly differently wired, as we all are, but it's probably as much nature as nurture again. I've had to learn through observation that small picture thinking, the granular details, are no good if it's not in a big setting, if you don't get that holistic solution in place. So that's potentially a weakness. That's all I can think of.
That was a good list. Thank you. Yes, I'm still here. So I'm going to read you a couple of things from the chat room. We've got a friend of the show, Ikening, says, some of those features of autism sound like ADHD, especially the ability to hyperfocus. We've got a slew of comments from Alamar, who started with a comment that unfortunately I can't post for some reason, but Alamar says, I just took an autism spectrum test and scored for indications of significant autistic traits, brings a new meaning to my hyper-focused tendencies. And then Alamar says, which I can put up, are all autistic individuals so logical? I see myself in a lot of autism symptoms, but the cold logic of it is not one of them for me, based on my indications of significant autistic traits. Have you found that people who are autistic are generally highly super logical?
Yeah, they're brutally rational sometimes. Don't get me wrong, like I say, there's an element of autism that tips the other way, and they become hyper creative. There's some amazing artists. I mean, there was a lot of talk about, someone who represents potentially the prototype of autism, Leonardo da Vinci. Now, they've got no way of testing him, obviously, but looking back through anecdotal evidence, things he wrote, things that people wrote about him, there's a strong theory that he had a strong element of autism about him. And he was one of those people who could be rationally logical and build the most amazing engineering, and yet be one of the greatest artists of our time. That gives you a sense that there's the ability to split as well, and there is an element, like it's a smaller element, but there is an element of autism that becomes very creative. I did a poll a while ago. I think I mentioned this to you. I wanted to know how many people who do UX are autistic.
Oh, yeah, I saw that on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So we put that up for a couple of weeks. I sent it out to a lot of different groups. I think we had, it was 130, 140 respondents, which isn't a huge sample size, but it's relatively indicative. And it was out amongst the UX groups specifically. When we got the final results in, 13% were autistic. Now, of course, there's a number of factors here that could change those variables slightly, but the bottom line is these were people who were diagnosed, people who did UX, and the rest of it, 87% or 82%, were not autistic. They were
As far as
UXers.
they knew.
Well, this is it. This is quite interesting as well. Someone had pointed out to me that these were only the people who were diagnosed, and potentially, and that's true, there's a lot of people undiagnosed. I was undiagnosed for a very long time, who go through life adapting, coping, being somewhere on the spectrum, not knowing. And I don't think it's particularly bad if you do or don't know. But 13% absolutely were. Now, when you look, that doesn't sound like a lot, 13%, but when you look at the national average across Europe and America, the national average for autism in the population is less than 3%, which means that a much higher percentage of people who are autistic are being drawn to autism, to UX than the standard population. So that was quite interesting too. Again, it sort of bears out the similar thinking. So yes, I think it is possible to have autistic traits and be very low down the spectrum, and maybe barely register because it is a spectrum, and not be cold and rational and logical. But I don't undersell those things. Cold doesn't mean robot, automaton, psychopath, killer. It just means you're not as swayed by the emotions or the empathy as other people. You're focused on the data.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just a reminder, everybody, we are taking questions and comments live, and I do have a couple of questions queued up. If you're on YouTube, won't you please have deep empathy for the like button? Give that a press and help me out. That's a joke. It's a joke. You can't have empathy for a like button. It's a joke. It's press the like button. Just freaking press the like button, everybody.
Yeah, that's more like it.
Yeah,
if you like it, press it.
Well, we say usability test the subscribe button, so these are jokes. Usability test the follow button on Twitch. The goal is to have 50 followers this month, and I'm so close, so please follow on Twitch. Of course, you can join our Slack workspace, which is totally free, deltacx.link/join Slack. And we now have the tip jar. If anybody wants to donate to the Streaming Computer Fund, it is deltacx.link/tip, or you can use the super chat in YouTube. Soon to be coming to Twitch. So that's a quick plug there. So we did have a question earlier that I'm going to kind of rephrase because it's similar to one of the questions I wanted to ask you, which was, do you think that someone should be hiding autism from their employer, or is this something you should come right out and tell them about?
Ooh, so challenges of autism in the workplace. Yes, this is... I guess I'd answer that it depends where you are in the world, how your society deals with autism. That's a really important thing. I know here in the UK, until recently, I was definitely not comfortable. And in fact, actually, I had a terrible first experience. We were out celebrating a launch with one of the teams I'd worked with on a contract in a restaurant, which in its own right wasn't a great experience because it's loud and lots of people are drinking and shouting. And but got to look like you fit in, right? Got a mask. So I was having a chat with one of the colleagues there, really nice guy, and we were joking about, I can't remember what it was about. We were joking about something. I don't know if it's common for all autistic people or it's just me, but I tend to have banter in terms of sarcasm, and this guy was doing the same. So we were poking each other with a virtual stick, and we were both laughing about it, and everybody was laughing. The guy sitting next to me decided he'd taken offence to something I said, which is not an unusual situation. He was your coworker or manager? He was my manager.
Yeah.
And he decided he'd taken offence to something I'd said. I am not unfamiliar with this situation. My whole life interacting with humans has resulted in many incidences where they've taken offence to something I said, and I still don't know why most of them have taken offence. So I sought to diffuse the situation. I said, look, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to be offensive. Yeah, he's laughing, I'm laughing. He was having none of it. He was furious with me. And I said, look, I don't really like to talk about this because it's quite a new diagnosis. I'm not sure how comfortable I am with it, and I don't know how people react. But you should probably know that I know why this is probably happening. I'm on the autistic spectrum, and sometimes we say things in such a way that people take offence. We don't make that emotional connection to what you're taking offence by, and I'm sort of surprised because you're not offended by anything he said, but you're offended by what I said. And he said he lost his rag at this point, which is interesting because rarely does anything I say diffuse the situation. It seems to make it worse somehow. So he lost his rag completely and told me that this was a Friday night, that when we got into work on Monday, he was going to fire me. Told me he was going to fire me because of what I'd said. Naturally, this held the same position as many of the interactions I've had, where I'm horrified by the aggressive, almost violent response I sometimes get to what are completely innocuous statements or comments. And I had to go to work and speak to the bosses and HR in advance and go, look, this has happened on Friday. I have no idea how this is going to play out, but he said he's going to come in and fire me. They were partially on my side, so that gives you a sense of how they treat autism in the workplace here. But equally, I was a contractor, he was permanent, and you know how that works. Contractor goes, permanent employees told off, so as far as they're concerned. But it's amazing that level of bigotry exists. And the statement that he said that really annoyed me, which is a rare thing to be able to do, is that he said, if you have autism, you have no right to be working with people. Like I should be locked away somewhere. He knew nothing about autism.
Clearly.
Clearly, he was not in a mood to know anything about autism. He just wanted to be angry about something.
Clearly, he was not a
and I
high
was the softest
empathy
target.
hero.
He was a bigot. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, if either of us was retarded, it was him. He's ironic. He's the sort of person that would be the first one to say that we should empathise with people, I'm certain.
Right.
And yet there was sod all empathy in his actions. But yeah, so there are some challenges in the workplace. There are things like you need autism-friendly workspaces. So if you're autistic, do not work at a digital agency. The noise, the people, that would just drive you mad. I did my phase of it in order to have it on my CV. It was important that I had digital agency work on there, but every day was a challenge, physically, emotionally,
Sensory.
all your senses on high alert, and getting people to think about, I'm sure you like grunge music at 300 million decibels while you create something visual. That doesn't really work for me.
Right.
It didn't really get me very far. So that's a problem. Awareness training would be really useful in the workplace, and that's missing. More so that neurotypicals could be treated, could treat autistic people with a level of courtesy, of understanding. I don't think autistic people should get special treatment, but any more than neurotypicals should. But neurotypicals, if they're on a phone call to a client, you would not stand around them talking loudly. It interferes with their work. If you put us in a place where I have to hot desk every day, that will interfere with my productivity. I have no sense of belonging or place, and I will not deliver optimally. If you play loud music or you have really bright colours, again, the problem is you're not going to get the best out of the people. You're accounting for their inability to work in that environment, just as you would do with anyone else. So that's a bit of a problem. What else? I suppose when I was contracting, it was useful to get between contracts. I'd do a month to 6 months, depending on the contract, and then I'd have a couple of months off. Sometimes I'd have more. And that's to do with masking, I discovered in retrospect. When you work somewhere, you tend to take on the persona of the environment. Again, I don't know if this is nature or nurture to a large degree, but all autistic people tell you that they mask. You give a persona of someone who belongs in that environment. You work into other people's requirements of how they expect you to behave. I definitely don't want to go to Vegas. I mean, God knows what would happen if I masked there. Married to a stripper chameleon with tattoos. Yeah. Well, this is it. This is the worry. So yeah, that's exhausting, and you need time off. And I think in a permanent role, that can be a bit brutal. Contracting, I got time off, and I come back re-energized, ready to go again. But that's a bit of a challenge. Opportunities, I guess. Companies think they have the Rain Man stereotype in their heads. They think that you're amazing with numbers, and therefore put you on as a developer, and you will code anything. And whilst coding is a great background for autistic people, I did it for a number of years. There's a certain level of frustration that you're building something that just won't work. Because again, you see the pattern built by
Right.
someone who doesn't see the patterns, and you go, well, this won't work. How many developers have said this won't work? It's because a lot of them are on that spectrum, or they think that way, and they can see it won't work. And it's very frustrating to build something you know is going to fail. But you do get companies in an attempt to be politically correct. You'll see the campaigns everywhere. Get autistic people coding. Brilliant. That's one job they could do. But how about you stop treating them like Rain Man and
Right.
actually find out what they're good at?
Hey, yeah, imagine that.
What
We,
else?
by the way, we have questions popping up in the chat room. Can I
Oh,
interrupt
yeah,
you?
sorry. Please do,
Yeah,
because otherwise I'll
thanks.
just keep going.
We've got a great question from LinkedIn. Thank you for your patience. This comes from Chunyin, and Chunyin says, "Hi guys, out of curiosity, what are the struggles for autism when it comes to analyzing qualitative data?"
That's an interesting question. I'm thinking of my own experience because do I have problems with qualitative data? No, no. So essentially, right, qualitative data, you're doing interviews, you're pulling out quantitative and qualitative information, and you're producing thematic insights from that data. So your data is essentially your quantitative data. So you're looking for patterns across that. How many people are saying this sort of thing? How much do they match? How are they relative to the user types? And from that, you're then evaluating it, you're codifying it into thematic insights, which are essentially your qualitative data. This is what this means. And I don't think I've ever had a problem using that data to produce qualitative information. If, on the other hand, you're talking about things like empathy mapping, where we're looking at what people say, do, think, and feel, then qualitative information is much more about, well, everything but what they do, in fact, to a large degree. Um, I could break this down for you, but it's going to take some time.
We don't have that much time, and we've got more
No, no.
questions.
So
So
that's not a problem.
I'm
Is
going
my
to
answer,
jump.
my short answer.
Thank you. That's the lightning version. Thank you. Give you some lightning. Um,
Ooh.
Kayleen says, I think mental health and disability education should be required for employee onboarding. Yes. Over in LinkedIn, Suchandra says, segueing from bright colors, when it comes to accessible design, how do we account for people on the spectrum?
We don't. In fact, I saw an autism site recently that had bright colours so bad I couldn't look at it. So I think you get you get autistic people to help with this. Again, back to UX and autism. Ask the user, for flip's sake. I said flip. Um, Yeah, ask the user. If you're testing with a user type, you go and find those people and you test with them. If you want to know how an autistic person will deal with accessibility or the nuances of color or brightness or sound, oh God, sound, then get an autistic panel. It makes sense. And again, though, through your research, should try to give some indication of, if it can, of what appeal this has to an autistic audience. I mean, generically speaking, there's always going to be some aspect, but some things will and some things won't.
Great, thank you. And we have lots of people expressing their thoughts and feelings around your story about that manager who wanted to fire you. So people are saying that person is ignorant. They're sorry you were treated that way. Awful manager. Sorry to hear it. Autistic people are geniuses. And Nicholas says he loved when you said, find out what they're actually good at. Why is that so hard?
It's interesting about the manager. I wasn't really offended, and again, that comes back to my lack of empathy, my lack of concern beyond the data. What was interesting for me is that people could feel that way, and react that way. And I took that away and took it apart. And it's actually a really healthy way to deal with these problems. And if you want to ask me what's a useful thing to take away as a non-autistic person, I'd say take away this attitude. If something's gone wrong or something's bad, even if it affects you strongly emotionally, break it down to the data, find out what's caused it, and learn something from that. Because there are two types of people. There are scholars and there are victims. The victims don't take anything away from these experiences. I could have been scarred by that quite easily if I was normal, and gone on to avoid that sort of work or that company or carry that baggage around with me forever. But actually, I'm not. I'm a scholar. I learn stuff from experiences. There's data in everything. And I learned that there are people like him, obviously. He had his own issues. Clearly, he had his own issues. Bullied as a child or something, I don't know. He's got a Ferrari to make up some sort of inconvenience. But he had real problems of his own, and he tried to take them out on me. I did the right thing. I know, looking back, I went and reported him. I spoke to them. Just like UX maturity, these things can't be fixed in one go. It takes everybody to stand up, say something, so that next time something like that happens, and it always does, whether it's a UX project or bigotry, the people involved will go, hang on, last time that wasn't good. We should do more about it this time. And it will slowly but surely get better.
We've dropped some hints at empathy as a topic, so I say we just go there now. So there's, I don't know if it's left over from Rain Man or some TV characters, but many people seem to think that autistic people have no empathy, they're incapable of empathy. Obviously, as a spectrum, some people might be and some people aren't, but give us your take on the whole autism and empathy thing.
Wow. Can of worms opened.
Yes, I'll give you dreamy stars again. Empathy.
Thanks. I'll try to keep this concise. Empathy is an emotional bias. I could speak about it on a number of different levels. So I'll take it back to my testing. As part of being tested for autism, they give you an EQ test, which is essentially conflated with empathy. It's more or less the same thing. They give you a test that's 80 points, 0 to 80. If you're 0, you're a robot, literally. If you're 80, you cry at sunrises and you can't go out without hugging everyone you see. So the healthy range, now I say the healthy range, right? The healthy range, as is defined by a neurotypical society, is between 30 and about 60. And they say that if you're 30 or below, you have an additional indicator that you may be on the autistic spectrum. So they use it as a backup piece. So they asked me to take this. I thought, being a good UXer, I'd get a broad set of benchmarks, and I got my team to take the same test. My team came out like 46 and 52. I can I can honestly say that there are psychopaths incorporated in maximum security mental asylums with a higher EQ than me, literally. Mine is in single digits, and I took it a few times just to make sure I was right. I have very low EQ. It doesn't mean to say I don't understand people's problems. I just
You don't have an emotional reaction to them.
Not generally, no. And in fact, if I'm really laying the truth on the line, there have been deaths in the family that I accept as people living, dying, and I don't get terribly upset about it. And one of my kids called me a heartless monster when my aunt died. And I think I said something to the effect of, she's very old, she was ill. It's a relief for her to go, I'm sure. A relief for her family. The reality is she had a great life. We all saw her. We all loved her. I hope mine's going to be as good as that. But, I wasn't crying. I wasn't upset. I saw the facts. But I think more than that, it interferes with your research. It introduces biases in your results. It inhibits your efficacy. It's unpredictable, inconsistent. It's full of emotional bias. I could talk about empathy just as a whole talk in its own right, so I'm going to keep it concise, like I say. I think one of the problems with empathy is that you have to pick a side. You're empathizing with something, and If you're doing UX, your job is not to pick a bloody side. Your job is to find the data and expose it and go, this is the right solution. I don't care who likes it and who hates it. This is what's best for the majority. You can't pick sides. If you empathize, you can't empathize with the gun maker and the pacifist at the same time. I'm sorry, it's just not possible. And if that's your goal, then you're living in this beautiful fantasy land where it would be lovely if everyone loved each other and they were all nice and bunnies hopped everywhere and unicorns were still alive. But that is not the case. We live in a world of partisan politics, personal beliefs, political agendas. And if you're going to cut through all that, which is the job of UX, one of the jobs of UX, and say, okay, underlying this need, this is a deliverable that's of value to this need. Here's the data that underlines that. And I will not be swayed by whether you like it, you hate it, it says something that you don't like. Too bad. That's not my job. I mean, again, a commonality between UX and autism. You're often the only person in the room talking sense and saying, this is the right position. This is it. And everybody disagrees with you. As an autistic person growing up, that was my daily life. What's wrong with you? Why don't you think like us? UXers, hands up if you've never been in a room like that as a UXer going, no, this is what the user needs. So empathy gets in the way of that as well.
I want to ask something from Oz. Oz says, I'm losing hope for asking users. I see companies putting stuff out, and when someone complains, the answer is, well, we aren't hearing that complaint much. Is UX based on how many complaints the company can collect?
Well, it's also based on their interest. If they're interested in complaints, I think actually this is interesting because this comes back a bit towards empathy mapping. With your empathy mapping, you have a nice happy or sad face on elements of the journey that people like or don't like. How they feel about that, empathizing, is the least important thing, especially, most importantly, to the business. The business don't care. If you have a call center, for example, and the user's spending 4 hours on hold, and then they spend another 2 hours being sent around 20 different people, they're going to have a sad face. And you're going to stick that on a document and go, look, you bad men, this is a sad face. And they're going to go, I don't give a fuck. How much money is that costing me? Oh, I said the F word.
It's okay.
I've been so good.
Yes.
Bleep, bleep.
It's okay.
I don't give a bleep, they're going to say, because it doesn't mean anything. They don't care. Again, ironically, people try to be empathetic, but they forget that the people they're presenting the data to are not empathetic. They're business owners.
I say
They're
that
quite
all the
ruthless.
time.
Yeah. What they
Where's
want
the money?
is your data. Yeah. Your data turned into meaningful value to them. Now, with things like an unhappy face on how long people waited on a call, what they really react to is, hey, so Debbie went on and to social media and she reported this to 12 people who are also customers of yours. On average, those people earn you £2,000 a year. That's you losing thousands and thousands of pounds because you're 4 hours on hold and 2 hours speaking to other people, plus the money it costs you to pass around 30 other people for 2 hours. Here's an actual value. They don't care. Again, this is where the empathy thing is the result, not the reading, not the insight. They don't care that made people sad. They care that because it made them sad, they lost money.
Right.
And that's where we have to get away from the empathy and say, look, this is your problem. Are they on a happy face? Yes, you can be sure, but I'm sure you don't care about that. What the unhappy face we care about is the accountant. And the happy face. That's the one that they want to know about. Your accountant's really happy with this. They're really sad with this. So yeah, that's really important to remember that.
And Stephanie says, those nice and happy faces, they look cute, but I always see the neutral face as sad face no matter how it was designed. It's so subjective.
Yes, yeah, and like I say, you're back to the data. You've got to take that away. I have been lectured regularly on empathy generally, and on my lack of empathy. I think, as Debbie knows, there was a list sent to me about how that makes me a bad UXer and a bad human. for for having no empathy or very little empathy. But it's how you judge the empathy and how much relevance you give it, and the fact that I think we talked about this recently. Delivering something that appears to deliver great empathy requires you to have none when you're doing the data. If you've got empathy, you will be biased. You'll choose a lens to look through. You will say this data is more important than that data because I empathize with that, and that's not your job. You deliver something that works, and people feel like you empathize with their needs because it delivers something that's of value to them. And then we get on to things like delight that come out of that, where I challenge anybody on the call now to tell me about a digital experience where they were delighted.
Yeah.
I guarantee you the bar is satisfaction. And satisfaction comes from delivering a functional solution that makes your life easier, better, quicker, whatever that value metric is. And that does not come from empathizing with people. It's
And we
always a
did
bit
this in
like
an earlier, we actually did an earlier podcast about this. I forgot what episode, 60 something, and it was empathetic design pros and cons. And we even talked about how Don Norman says, don't try to
I saw
design
that.
with empathy. Yeah, that podcast
Yeah.
was memorable because my entire system crashed in the middle of it and I had to call back in as my own guest. So don't
Excellent.
forget to donate to the new computer fund. But I just want to remind everybody we are wrapping up on time. We only have about 7 or 8 minutes left, if you can believe that. So if you have any other comments or questions for Sean, we've got another comment from Oz, and then I'm going to throw a question at you, Sean, from my list. Oz says, empathy is important because it's the start of people giving a damn. I don't give a shit about the company's money. I care about people on hold, and that leads me to making the case about lost revenue, and Oz has experience there. So I guess the question is, can you give a shit without having empathy?
The question is, do you need to give a shit? What you care about is the UX process. What is the UX process about? Well, it's about uncovering the truth, the data, producing maximum value for the user, the business, and the project teams so that they can all do their job well. The business gets more revenue, the users are happier, because the core principle behind all business is to align what a business can deliver with what a user is most willing to part with time and money for, because that's a happy user and a happy business and a successful model. Our job is to give a shit about that. I do passionately give a shit about that. Do I care that they have a happy or a sad face when they're doing it? No, not even for a minute, because it's not relevant data. I think, much like many of the things we see now, it's overemphasized, it's over-egged. People talk about empathy like it's the next buzzword, the next great thing to save us, and it's not. And I always find, and possibly it's worse because I come from a low EQ background, that being lectured about how important empathy is like being lectured by an alcoholic about how important drinking is. You've got one lens to see the world through if you're an alcoholic, and you don't believe anything else is more important, and you can't step back from that if that's your only lens. I actually think that my low EQ means that I'm not influenced by empathy, anything. I'm literally just looking at the facts, and the facts are ultimately what we deliver on.
And I just want to throw in quickly what I always remind people, which is empathy is nice, but what knowledge do we have about our users and customers, and what action are we taking? If we did not do the right research to collect the appropriate knowledge about users and their tasks and their needs, and then we didn't take the right action to give people what they needed, I don't care if you had empathy or claimed to have empathy. That is my little empathy, knowledge, action model. Thank you and good night.
Well said, Debbie. And in fact, if you take the empathy approach first and you give it priority, you might end up giving them the wrong action because you're empathizing with their needs. Again, the gun manufacturer and the pacifist, who do you give priority to here? Well, I believe the pacifist is important, so I'm going to give them everything, but the gun manufacturers give us all the money. Anyway,
Who do we
sorry,
make happy?
carry on.
Okay, so since we're down to a few minutes, last comments and questions, but what I want to ask you is if anybody listening or watching live or later on the recorded archived versions, always archived on YouTube, if anybody suspects they might be autistic or someone they love might be autistic, and we don't just want to go by online surveys, what do you suggest as some of the ways, maybe that's a start, but how do you get diagnosed? How do you find out if you're autistic?
Is that to me?
Yeah, who else?
Oh, sorry. You said I want to ask the people online. Um,
Sorry.
so there actually are online tests that I know you said without using those, but actually they're really useful for confirmation.
Okay.
Um, Outside of that, it really is about studying. There's a lot of autistic information out there now that will talk you through different traits. If you start going through those because you suspect there's elements. I mean, part of what I did was I started to see things and go, "Ooh, hang on, I do that." And hopefully, out of today's talk, some people will start to go, "Ooh, I do that." Um, it's not a terrible thing to know. You don't have to share that with anyone. There are a number of tests online that are the online versions of the test they actually give you anyway,
Mm,
so they're quite factual. The challenge is doing them honestly. That there is answers you won't want to give. No, I'm not like that. You'll
right.
want to say that. Um,
I took
all
that
I'd say
test
to
and I
people
know
is,
what I took what the main test online and I know what you're talking about where you'll want to say, no, I'm not
yeah,
really like that. Maybe I'm more social or maybe I do like to walk with people or
yeah,
maybe I remember those questions and I could see how people might want to be like, and you're right.
because
You
it's
have to
your
give the right
test.
answer.
Just be honest. You'll be surprised what comes out the other end, and nobody needs to know. Only you. So it's as well to spend a bit of time thinking. There are some questions that are just poorly written. Honestly, again, doing user research, you're used to writing good scripts, right? Some of these questions, I'd write to complain to them about them, definitely. But they
Surveys,
give you
flaws
a
of
good indication.
surveys.
Yeah, exactly. And not written by the people who it's for. So yeah, my recommendation would be read a bit more if you think you might be, if you're concerned at all. If you're concerned at all, don't be concerned. There's honestly, if you're a high functioning autistic, there's no downside as far as I can see. Really, even the things that are considered to be downsides are only the same as being neurotypical and having downsides. Um, so yeah, try the online tests. Debbie, if you've got the links, if you don't, I'll send them through to you.
I don't. Do you remember what the
I'll
test
send you
is
the
called so people can Google it and not end up with some cheesy Facebook quiz?
Yes. I can tell you exactly. Bear with
I
me.
remember I remember taking the main one and it looked like it was built for the web in like 1996. It was not a
They do.
modern looking
Yeah.
form. Yeah.
Well, that's how you can tell they're real healthcare ones
No
because they have no
UXers were involved.
UX at all.
Yeah.
Yes, no
Right.
UXers were harmed in the making of this
Yes,
test.
exactly. That's what
Um,
I say.
so there's the AQ, the Autism Spectrum Quotient, um, and I don't know if I can send you a link. I probably can't. And there's the RAADS 14, the RITVO Autism and Asperger's Diagnostic Scale, which is much smaller. It's only about 14 questions.
Yeah, there was
The
one that
big
was like
one,
150 questions.
yeah, there is a big one as well that goes through quite a few questions. Well worth doing once you've got the other ones done. The empathy quotient is about 60 questions, I think it is, and yeah, it is 60 questions. But worth doing that too. I was surprised how low my EQ was. But if you answer honestly, you get to a situation where you go, I didn't think I was that low in empathy, given how I work and the successful results I deliver that do make people's lives better. And then you have to ask, well, again, how important is empathy, or how accurate is our current definition of empathy?
Right. Yes. I mean, even I've changed my stance on it. I mean, a couple of years ago, I thought, oh my God, empathy is so important. I had it in my presentations. I think even in my book, I still felt like this is important. And then over the last few years, especially when I thought of this whole thing, I was like, well, wait a minute. Empathy sounds nice, but if we don't have the right information and we don't take the right actions, what good was the empathy we supposedly had?
Yeah,
Congratulations, you
yeah,
felt for the user and did nothing, did the wrong thing.
yeah. And now you can feel for the user again. You get your double whammy. Now you can feel like you should have delivered something better.
Right?
Empathize with that.
I'm miserable. Anyway,
Yeah.
we're gonna have to run. So, Sean, tell everybody, where can they find you, follow you, connect with you? Are you a tweeting guy, a LinkedIn guy, a website guy?
I am on LinkedIn. Nearly primarily. I run a meetup. I'm about to start the meetup group, UX Sanctuary, but that also exists on LinkedIn as a group. You can follow me on Sean McSharry on LinkedIn as well. The Sanctuary's literally what it says on the tin. The idea is to bring together UXers, and my position on UX UI. So that's a fight we don't have to start today. There's no time for that. So UX Sanctuary is very much about modern UX. Thank you. You need to get the horns on me, you see.
No, I don't have that. I'm not going to make you a kitten.
Yeah, so I'd quite like that. So LinkedIn or UX Sanctuary meetup group. That meetup group will be starting properly soon. It's been put off for a year through COVID and God knows what else. But LinkedIn's probably the best thing.
Okay, super. And quick last comment from Oz before we run. Oz says, I'm struggling with his empathy perspective. I've worked for people who had little empathy. Morale sucked. Turnover was high. But the company was still profitable and people were miserable.
Right. So this is an important point because Darren brought this up as well. It's easy to confuse empathy when you're talking about autistic people, psychopaths, and people who are just selfish and narcissistic. They all have low EQ. It doesn't make them the same sort of people, and they're not applying EQ the same way. If you look at narcissistic people, and I've worked for a number of CEOs who were clearly, literally on the psychopath range, and very narcissistic. And of course they have low EQ, they have low empathy, but theirs is because they're selfish bastards. Ours is the literal opposite. We are trying nothing but to give to people, to the world, to society, to businesses. It is the opposite use of low EQ.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm glad you threw that in. So, Oz, thank you for that comment. Sean, great answer. I'm going to have to play us out of here, but I hope everyone will join us live tomorrow where I will be doing Office Hours Ask Me Anything. And of course, Wednesday, February 17th, our guest will be the just mentioned Darren Hood, where we are going to dream of what would it be like if UX were actually held accountable at our jobs. What would change if we were actually held accountable? I see Sean thinking. Maybe you'll join us. And
I am.
I'm not. So I'm going to play us out of here. But Sean, thank you again for joining us for this and especially sharing your personal experiences and perspectives for something that is personal. And thanks to the live audience for the great chat. So I'm going to play us out of here. But be safe, everybody, and see you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Delta CX, available for CX and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation.